The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was silent. 300 delegates from across the known universe sat in their seats, watching the center platform where the fate of an entire species was about to be decided. The hall itself was enormous, built inside a space station that floated at the exact center of civilized space. Its walls were made of transparent material that showed the stars outside, and its ceiling rose so high that clouds sometimes formed near the top. Commander Daniel Grant stood at the human delegation's podium, his hands gripping the edges so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. He was a tall man with gray hair at his temples and deep lines around his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights and too many difficult decisions. His dress uniform was perfectly pressed, every medal in its proper place, but none of that mattered now. What mattered was the vote that was about to happen. Beside him stood Dr. Lisa Monroe, the head of Earth's diplomatic corps. She was younger than Daniel, with dark hair pulled back in a simple style and eyes that usually sparkled with intelligence and humor. Right now, those eyes were filled with worry. She held a tablet in her hands, but she had stopped looking at it 10 minutes ago. There was nothing on it that could help them now. Across the chamber, Ambassador Oran of the Dominion was speaking. There were reptilian creatures, tall and covered in scales that changed color with their moods. Right now, Oran's scales were a deep purple, the color of satisfaction and triumph. He had been working toward this moment for years, and he could taste victory. "The evidence is clear," Oran said, his forked tongue flicking out between his words. "Humanity has violated no fewer than 17 treaties in their expansion into the Outer Rim territories. They have established colonies on worlds that were claimed by other species. They have built military outposts in neutral zones. They have acted as if the laws that govern the rest of us do not apply to them." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Daniel watched as delegates from a dozen species nodded their heads or made whatever gesture their kind used to show approval. The beings with clicking mandibles and compound eyes tapped their front legs together in support. The Thresh, massive creatures that looked like floating jellyfish, pulsed with colors that indicated agreement. Even a species known for staying neutral in almost every dispute, seemed to be leaning toward Oran's position. "Therefore," Oran continued, his voice rising with confidence, "I move that humanity be expelled from the Galactic Council. They are a young species, barely out of their planetary cradle, and they have proven themselves unworthy of the trust we placed in them. Let them return to their single world and learn humility before they dare to walk among the stars again." Daniel felt his stomach drop. Expulsion from the Council would be catastrophic for Earth. It would mean losing access to interstellar trade routes, losing the protection of Council law, losing everything humanity had worked so hard to build over the past 4 decades. Earth's colonies would be cut off, vulnerable to any aggressive species that wanted to claim them. The human race would be pushed back to a single planet, isolated and alone in a hostile universe. He stepped forward to speak, but his voice felt weak compared to the confident tones of the ambassador. "This is absurd," he said. "The territories we settled were unclaimed. The treaty's ambassador Oran references were replaced by newer agreements that—" "Silence," Oran interrupted, his scales flushing darker. "You will speak when the Council recognizes you human. You do not have the floor." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to step back. Arguing would only make things worse. He could see the other delegates watching him, waiting to see how he would react. Some of them seemed almost eager for him to lose his temper, to prove that humans were the emotional, unstable creatures that Oran had been describing. Lisa put a hand on his arm, a small gesture of support. "Stay calm," she whispered. "We knew this might happen. We have to play this carefully." But Daniel knew the truth. They had no cards left to play. Earth had few allies in this chamber, and most of them were too weak to stand against the coalition that Oran had assembled. They had been preparing for this moment for years, building alliances, calling in favors, manipulating events to bring them to this point. And now they were going to win. The High Arbiter, the ancient being who presided over council sessions, raised one withered hand. The High Arbiter was a species so old that no one remembered when they had first achieved space travel. His body was more machine than flesh now, kept alive by technology that hummed and clicked with every movement. His eyes, pale and clouded with age, swept across the chamber. "The motion has been made," the High Arbiter said, his voice a mechanical rasp. "Debate will now proceed according to standard protocols. Does any delegate wish to speak in opposition to the motion?" Silence. Daniel looked around the chamber, searching for any sign of support. The species that had traded extensively with Earth refused to meet his eyes. The who had signed a mutual defense treaty with humanity just 5 years ago were staring at the floor. Even the who had always seemed friendly toward humans sat with their arms crossed and their faces blank. No one was going to help them. "Very well," the High Arbiter said. "If there is no opposition, the vote will proceed. All delegates in favor of expulsion will signal now." Lights began to appear across the chamber as delegates registered their votes. Green lights for expulsion. The board that displayed the vote count began to fill with green, more and more of it, like a tide that could not be stopped. Daniel closed his eyes. This was it. Everything humanity had built, everything they had sacrificed, was about to be taken away. He thought of his daughter back on Earth, of the world she would inherit if this vote went through. A world cut off from the stars, surrounded by enemies, with no future except slow decline. "Wait." The voice was thin and weak, barely more than a whisper, but somehow it cut through the chamber like a knife, silencing every other sound. Every head turned toward the far corner of the room, where a single delegate sat in a hoverchair that supported his frail body. The delegate was ancient, so old that his skin had become almost transparent, showing the network of veins beneath. His species, were rare now, almost extinct. Fewer than 10,000 of them remained in the entire galaxy, scattered in small groups across 100 different worlds. Ambassador had not spoken in a council session for nearly 30 years. Most delegates had forgotten he was even there, assuming he attended merely out of habit, a living relic of a species that had once been great but was now fading into history. Oran's scales flickered with irritation. "They have no standing in this matter. Your species has nothing to gain or lose from this vote." "I have everything to gain and everything to lose," replied. His voice grew stronger as he spoke, as if the act of speaking was bringing him back to life. "I invoke the right of testimony. Before any vote of expulsion, I demand the right to speak." A murmur ran through the chamber. The right of testimony was an ancient privilege, rarely used but never. It allowed any delegate to address the full council before a major vote, regardless of their species standing in the matter at hand. The High Arbiter's mechanical eyes focused on the ancient. "The right of testimony is granted. Ambassador, you may speak." His hoverchair hummed as it carried him toward the center of the chamber. The delegates watched in silence as the ancient alien made his slow journey, his thin body barely visible beneath the blankets that covered him. When he reached the central platform, he positioned himself beside the human delegation, close enough that Daniel could see every line and wrinkle on his aged face. 43 years ago, began, a colony ship suffered a catastrophic engine failure in the expanse. The ship was called the Endless Hope, and it carried 3,000 of my people. They were colonists, families with children, scientists and teachers and farmers, all of them seeking a new home where they could rebuild what we had lost when our died. He paused, and the silence in the chamber was absolute. Even Oran had stopped moving, his scales frozen in a pattern of reluctant attention. When the engines failed, the ship began to break apart. Life support systems started to fail. The colonists had perhaps 3 days before the air ran out, before the cold of space claimed them all. They sent out a distress signal, broadcasting on every frequency, begging anyone who could hear them to come and help. His chair rotated slowly, his milky eyes passing over each delegation in turn. They heard that signal. Their military command calculated that a rescue mission would require diverting ships from their patrol routes, ships that were needed elsewhere for important strategic purposes. They decided that 3,000 lives were not worth the inconvenience. They did nothing. Oran's scales flushed with color, but he did not speak. They heard the signal too. Their leaders convened a committee to discuss the matter. They debated for 6 days, arguing about jurisdictional issues, about who should pay for the rescue, about whether they had followed proper protocols in sending their distress call. By the time they finished debating, it would have been too late anyway. But it did not matter because they decided that the rescue was someone else's responsibility. They did nothing. The delegates clicked their mandibles nervously, their compound eyes looking anywhere except at the ancient. The Thresh received the signal and sent a message of sympathy. They expressed their deep regret at the tragedy that was unfolding. They offered prayers and good wishes, and then they did nothing. His voice grew stronger with each word, filled with an anger that had clearly been burning for more than 4 decades. I know all of this because I was monitoring the communications. My daughter was on that ship, along with her husband and their 2 children, I listened to every response, every excuse, every reason why the great powers of this galaxy could not be bothered to save 3,000 innocent people. He turned to face the human delegation, and Daniel saw tears forming in those ancient eyes. And then humanity responded. The chamber seemed to hold its breath. At that time, humans had only achieved faster-than-light travel 3 years before. They had exactly one functioning starship capable of interstellar travel, an exploration vessel called the Endeavor. It was small, poorly armed, with engines that were still considered experimental. Its crew numbered fewer than 200, most of them young and inexperienced. His voice softened, taking on a tone of wonder that contrasted sharply with the anger of moments before. The captain of the Endeavor was a young man named Peter. He was 34 years old, with a wife and young son waiting for him back on Earth. When he received our distress signal, he did not convene a committee. He did not calculate the strategic implications. He did not weigh the costs and benefits. The ancient reached out and placed one trembling hand on Daniel's arm. He simply changed course and pushed his engines as hard as they would go. He burned fuel he could not afford to burn. He risked his ship and his crew without hesitation, and when his officers asked him why, do you know what he said? Daniel shook his head, unable to speak. He said, because they need help and we can give it. That is all the reason anyone should ever need. His chair turned back to face the chamber. The Endeavor reached the Endless Hope with less than 6 hours to spare. By that time, the colony ship was falling apart, whole sections breaking away into the void. Life support had failed in half the compartments. People were dying. He paused, gathering his strength for what came next. Captain's ship could safely carry 800 passengers. 800, and there were 3,000 waiting to be rescued. Do you know what he did? The chamber remained silent. He packed every corridor with survivors. He filled every cargo bay, every storage compartment, every space that could hold a living body. He gave up his own quarters, his crew's quarters. He emptied the food stores to make room for more people. He pushed his ship so far beyond its limits that 2 of the engines exploded during the return journey. His voice cracked, but he continued. 17 human crew members died keeping those engines running. 17 young men and women who had their whole lives ahead of them. They worked in compartments filled with radiation, in sections where the hull was breaching, in conditions that they knew would kill them. And they did it willingly, because their captain asked them to, because 3,000 strangers needed help. Tears were flowing freely down the ancient alien's face now, but his voice remained strong. Peter saved everyone. Every single on that ship survived because of him and his crew. My daughter lived. My great live today, and their children, and their children's children. All of them owe their existence to 17 humans who gave their lives for people they had never met. He turned to look at Iran, and his voice became cold. You call humanity young and reckless. You call them dangerous. You say they are unworthy of trust. But I have watched this galaxy for nearly 2 centuries, Ambassador, and I have never seen another species do what those humans did. Not the with all their power, not the with all their wisdom, not any of the great civilizations represented in this chamber. His chair moved closer to the delegation. 17 humans died for 3,000, and they asked for nothing in return. When their government tried to give Captain a medal, he refused it. He said that he had only done what anyone with a ship and a heart would do. He could not understand why everyone was making such a fuss about it. The ancient laughed, a thin sound that echoed strangely in the silent chamber. That is humanity, Ambassador Iran. That is what you are so eager to cast out. A species that saves strangers without thought of reward. A species that sacrifices its children for people it has never met. A species that does not understand why the rest of us find their kindness so remarkable. He turned back to face the full chamber. For 43 years, I have waited for a chance to repay what Peter gave to my people. I am old now, too old to wait much longer. So I will make my payment today in full view of this council, so that everyone will know what to think of humanity's worth. Reached into the folds of his blankets and produced a small device, a data crystal that glowed with a soft blue light. Before our died, they were known for one thing above all others: our archives. Our libraries contain the most complete collection of knowledge in the galaxy. 200,000 years of history, science, philosophy, art, everything we had learned since our species first looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. A murmur ran through the chamber. The archives were legendary, spoken of in whispered tones as a treasure beyond price. When they was destroyed, everyone assumed the archives had been lost forever. Everyone believes those archives were destroyed, said, as if reading the thoughts of the delegates around him. But they learned long ago that knowledge is too precious to keep in one place. Before the end, we scattered copies of our archives throughout the galaxy. Hidden vaults, secret locations, waiting for the day when they might be needed. Iran's scales had gone pale, a sign of shock that Daniel had never seen before on a. I know the locations of 17 such vaults, continued. 17 repositories containing everything they ever learned, technologies that your species have not yet discovered, medical advances that could cure diseases you have no treatments for, historical records that would change everything you think you know about this galaxy. He held up the data crystal, letting its light play across his transparent skin. I am prepared to share the location of one vault with any species that votes against humanity's expulsion today. The effect was immediate. Delegates leaned forward in their seats, whispering urgently with their aides. The promise of even a fraction of the archives was enough to make empires change their policies. Species that had been ready to vote against humanity were suddenly reconsidering their positions. Furthermore, added, his voice rising over the growing noise, to humanity itself, I will give the locations of 3 vaults. Consider it a small payment against a debt that can never truly be repaid. Daniel stared at the ancient alien in disbelief. Ambassador, we cannot accept such a gift. We did not help your people expecting anything in return. Smiled a thin expression that transformed his weathered face. I know, Commander. That is exactly why you deserve it. That is what makes humanity different from everyone else in this chamber. You give without expecting to receive. You help without thought of payment. You remember your friends and you honor your debts, even when those friends have nothing to offer you. He turned back to face the chamber one final time. I have lived for nearly 200 years. I have watched 1,000 species rise and fall. I have seen empires built on conquest crumble to dust. I have seen alliances forged in self-interest collapse at the first sign of trouble. But the bonds built on genuine kindness, on loyalty freely given, those are the bonds that endure. His voice dropped, becoming soft and intimate despite the vast size of the chamber. Peter did not save my people because he expected gratitude. He saved them because it was right, because they needed help and he could give it. And for 43 years, his spirit has haunted me, reminding me that I owe a debt that I can never fully repay. He looked directly at Iran. Vote however you wish, Ambassador, but know that we remember who helped us when we were dying and we remember who turned away, and we repay our debts, one way or another. The High Arbiter's mechanical voice cut through the silence. Ambassador Iran, do you wish to proceed with the vote? The ambassador's scales were cycling through colors rapidly, a sign of intense internal conflict. The political situation had shifted dramatically. Any species that voted against humanity now would lose access to the archives. For knowledge-hungry civilizations like that was an unthinkable price to pay. This is manipulation, Oran said, but his voice had lost its confidence. This is bribery of the council. This is gratitude, replied calmly. Something your species seems to have forgotten. I am not bribing anyone. I am simply choosing to share my people's legacy with those who demonstrate the values we hold dear. Kindness, loyalty, the willingness to help others without expecting anything in return. The vote proceeded. When the final count appeared on the chamber's display, the result was overwhelming. Humanity's expulsion had been rejected by a margin of nearly 3-1. Species that had seemed eager to cast Earth out were now expressing their friendship and support. They were clicking their mandibles in approval of humans. The Thresh were pulsing with colors of welcome, even though were nodding in humanity's direction. Only the delegation remained still, their scales dark with barely contained fury. As the chamber began to empty, his hoverchair carried him back toward the human delegation. Up close, Daniel could see how much the speech had cost the ancient alien. His body seemed even frailer than before, as if the effort of speaking had drained something vital from him. You saved us, Lisa said, her voice thick with emotion. How can we ever thank you? Reached out and took her hand in his skin cool and paper-thin against hers. Live worthy of it. That is all I ask. Peter did not save my people because he expected thanks. He saved them because it was right. Honor his memory by being the species he believed you were. Daniel straightened to attention, old military habits taking over. The people of Earth will not forget this, Ambassador. If your people ever need anything, anything at all, we will be there. The ancient smiled. I know you will, Commander. That is the point. That is what makes humanity special. You remember, you honor your debts, and you return loyalty in ways that others never expect. He began to drift toward the exit, then paused, looking back over his shoulder. There is something else you should know, he said. Something about Captain. Daniel and Lisa exchanged glances. What is it? Daniel asked. After the rescue, Captain returned to Earth a hero, but he never accepted any of the honors that were offered to him. He said that he had only done his duty, that any human would have done the same in his place. He refused medals, refused promotions, refused everything except the chance to keep flying. His eyes grew distant, lost in memory. He continued to command the Endeavor for another 20 years. During that time, he responded to 37 more distress calls. He saved thousands of lives, human and alien alike. He never turned down a call for help, no matter how dangerous the situation, no matter what species was in trouble. The ancient's voice grew soft. He died at the age of 62 during a rescue mission in the nebula. A plague ship was breaking apart, and he insisted on making one more trip to pull survivors from the wreckage. The ship exploded while he was still inside. Daniel felt a lump forming in his throat. I have never heard this story. Why is he not more famous among my people? Because he asked his crew to keep it quiet, replied. He said that he did not want to be remembered as a hero. He wanted to be remembered as someone who did his job, just a captain who helped people when they needed help. The ancient alien's eyes met Daniel's. But I remember him, Commander, remember him. And now you will remember him too. Captain Peter of the Endeavor, the man who saved 3,000 lives because it was the right thing to do. He turned his chair and continued toward the exit. Find his descendants, called back. Tell them what their ancestor meant to us. Tell them that his kindness echoed across 4 decades and saved their entire species from ruin. Tell them that they will never forget. Daniel watched the ancient alien disappear through the doorway, then turned to Lisa. Her eyes were wet with unshed tears. We need to find Captain's family, he said. They deserve to know the truth. Lisa nodded, already pulling up information on her tablet. I am searching now. According to the records, he had one son who had 2 daughters who had several children of their own. His great-greats are alive today. Most of them live on Earth, though a few are scattered across the colonies. None of them know, Daniel said. None of them have any idea that their ancestor saved an entire species, that his kindness just saved ours. We will tell them, Lisa promised. We will make sure the story is never forgotten again. They walked out of the chamber together, past groups of delegates who were still discussing what had just happened. Daniel could hear fragments of their conversations, words like remarkable and unprecedented, and who would have thought. But his mind was elsewhere, focused on a young captain from 43 years ago, a man who had looked at 3,000 dying aliens and decided that their lives were worth risking everything for. A man who had inspired his crew to give their lives for strangers, and who had spent the rest of his days doing the same thing over and over again. That was humanity, he realized. Not the politics, not the treaties, not the endless negotiations and compromises that filled his daily life. Humanity was Peter changing course because someone needed help. Humanity was 17 crew members working in deadly conditions because their captain asked them to. Humanity was a species that did not understand why the rest of the galaxy found their kindness so strange. Outside the council chamber, the stars stretched in every direction, countless points of light representing worlds and civilizations beyond counting. Somewhere out there, 17 vaults waited, filled with knowledge that could change everything. And somewhere out there, the descendants of Peter went about their lives, unaware of what their ancestor had done. Daniel made a silent promise to himself. He would find them, he would tell them the truth, and he would make sure that the story of the Endeavor was never forgotten, not just but among all of humanity. Because that was how humans repaid their debts, not with gold or power or political favors, but with memory, with loyalty, with the determination to honor those who came before and to be worthy of the sacrifices they had made. The galaxy did not understand humanity yet, but one day Daniel believed they would. And when that day came, they would realize that there was no better friend in all the cosmos than a human who remembered a kindness, and no worse enemy than one who remembered a betrayal. 6 months passed after the council vote, and the galaxy slowly returned to its normal rhythms. Trade ships moved between worlds, diplomats argued over treaties, and the great powers continued their endless games of influence and power. But something had changed, something subtle that most beings could not quite identify. Humanity was being watched now, in a way they had never been watched before. In the corridors of the Dominion, military commanders discussed the humans with a new note of caution in their voices. A species that would sacrifice 17 crew members to save strangers was a species that could not be easily predicted. Their capacity for self-sacrifice made them dangerous in ways that simple military strength could not match. In the hive minds of the story of the Endeavor was analyzed and debated endlessly. The insects could not understand why humans would act against their own obvious self-interest. It violated every principle of rational behavior that they held dear. And yet, the results spoke for themselves. Humanity had survived, had thrived, had turned a 40-year-old act of kindness into a shield against their enemies. In the flowing thoughts of the Thresh, there was something like shame. They remembered the distress call they had ignored, the message of sympathy they had sent instead of ships. They began to wonder if perhaps there were forms of strength that they had not considered, forms of power that came not from size or technology, but from something more fundamental. And in the scattered enclaves of there was joy. For the first time in generations, their species had made a difference in galactic affairs. They had stood up in the Great Council and spoken truth to power. They had repaid a debt that had haunted them for more than 4 decades. And in doing so, they had reminded the galaxy that the still mattered, that their knowledge and their gratitude were forces to be reckoned with. Ambassador did not survive to see all of this. He died peacefully in his sleep 3 weeks after the council vote, his ancient body finally giving out after nearly 2 centuries of life. But before he died, he made sure that his promise was kept. The locations of the 3 vaults were transmitted to Earth's government, along with detailed instructions for accessing their contents. And the locations of 14 other vaults were shared with the species that had voted in humanity's favor, each one receiving a treasure trove of knowledge as reward for their choice. The contents of those vaults changed everything. Earth's scientists found cures for diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries. They discovered new forms of energy that were cleaner and more efficient than anything they had imagined. They learned the secrets of materials that could make their ships faster and their colonies safer. And they found historical records that revealed the true scope of civilization, a species that had once spanned 1,000 worlds and had walked among the stars when humanity's ancestors were still learning to use fire. But the greatest treasure in the vaults was not technology or medicine or history. It was something simpler and more profound. It was the story of the Endeavor. They had preserved every detail of the rescue, every message that had been sent, every decision that had been made. They had recorded the names of the 17 crew members who had died, along with biographies that told the stories of their short lives. They had documented Captain's final words to his crew, the simple speech he had given before asking them to risk their lives for strangers. "These people need our help," had said. "I cannot promise that we will all survive this. I cannot even promise that we will succeed. But I can promise you this. If we turn away now, if we leave these people to die when we could have saved them, then we will never be able to look at ourselves in the mirror again. We will have to live with that choice for the rest of our lives." He had paused, looking at the young faces of his crew. "I am going to help them. I am asking you to come with me, but if anyone wants to stay behind, I will understand. This is not what you signed up for. This is not your duty. This is just what I believe is right." Not a single crew member had stayed behind. When this story was released to the public, it spread across human space like wildfire. Schools taught it to their students. Parents told it to their children. Monuments were built to the 17 who had died and to Captain himself. The name Endeavor became a symbol of everything humanity aspired to be, a reminder that courage and kindness were not weaknesses but strengths. And somewhere in the quiet suburbs of a city called Portland, a woman named learned the truth about her great-great-grandfather. She was 42 years old, a schoolteacher with 2 children of her own. She had known that her ancestor had been a starship captain, one of the first humans to travel faster than light. But she had never known the details. The family had passed down a few stories, a few photographs, a medal that Peter had reluctantly accepted before tucking it away in a drawer and never looking at it again. Now she stood in her living room, watching a documentary that told the full story for the first time. She saw the faces of the 17 crew members who had died. She heard her ancestor's voice, preserved across the decades, asking his crew to follow him into danger. She learned about the 3,000 who had lived because of what he had done. And she understood, finally, why her family had always been a little different, why her grandfather had volunteered at the local hospital every weekend until the day he died, why her mother had spent 30 years working for refugee resettlement agencies, why she herself had chosen to become a teacher, to shape young minds and help them become better people. It was in their blood, it was who they were. Commander Daniel Grant visited her a month later, traveling all the way from the council station to deliver a personal message from the people. He brought with him a delegation that included Ambassador's grandson, a young named who had never met his famous grandfather but who carried his memory with pride. They sat in his living room, surrounded by family photographs and children's artwork, and they talked for hours. Told her stories about his grandmother, the woman Peter had saved, who had lived to be 112 and had never forgotten the humans who had rescued her. He described how they spoke of the Endeavor, how the ship had become a legend among his people, a symbol of hope in their darkest hours. "Your ancestor gave us everything," said. "He gave us our future, and we never had a chance to thank him properly. He died before we could find the words." Looked at the young alien, so different from her in every physical way, yet somehow so familiar in his emotions. "He would not have wanted thanks," she said. "He would have said that he was just doing his job." "I know," replied. "That is what makes it so meaningful. He did not do it for glory or reward. He did it because it was right, because you needed help and he could give it." He reached into a bag he had brought with him and produced a small object, a data crystal similar to the one his grandfather had shown in the council chamber. "This contains a complete record of your ancestors' rescue mission," he said. "Every message, every decision, every name. They preserved it because we wanted to remember. Now we want you to have it, so that your family will always know what Peter meant to us." Took the crystal with trembling hands. It was warm to the touch, glowing with a soft inner light that seemed almost alive. "Thank you," she whispered. "This means more than I can say." "There is one more thing," Daniel said. He had been quiet during most of the conversation, letting speak for his people. But now he leaned forward, his expression serious. "The council has voted to name a new class of rescue ships after your ancestor. The class vessels will be the fastest and most capable rescue ships ever built, designed specifically to respond to distress calls anywhere in the galaxy. The first ship will be launched next year, and we would like you to be there for the ceremony." Stared at him, unable to find words. "We would also like to establish a foundation in his name," Daniel continued. "The Peter Foundation will fund rescue operations, train crews, and develop new technologies to save lives. It will be humanity's way of continuing what your ancestor started. His legacy will live on, not just in memory, but in action." He would have liked that, finally managed to say. He would have said it was too much fuss, but he would have liked knowing that people were being helped because of what he did. She looked at the data crystal in her hands, then at the sitting in her living room, then at the human commander who had traveled across the galaxy to honor her ancestor. "This is what humanity is supposed to be, is it not?" she asked. "Helping people, remembering kindness, repaying loyalty in ways they never expected." Daniel smiled. "That is exactly what we are supposed to be. Your ancestor understood that better than anyone. And now, thanks to him, the rest of the galaxy is starting to understand it too." The ceremony for the first-class rescue ship took place 1 year later, in orbit around Earth. Thousands of people attended, filling the observation decks of the orbital station where the ship was docked. Representatives from 100 different species were present, including a large delegation of who had traveled from across the galaxy to witness the event. Stood at the center of it all, her children beside her, her extended family filling the rows behind her. She had never been comfortable with public attention, but this was different. This was not about her. It was about a man who had died 60 years before she was born, a man whose choice in a single moment had echoed across decades and changed the fate of worlds. The ship itself was beautiful, a sleek vessel designed for speed and maneuverability. Its hull was painted with the insignia of the newly formed Galactic Rescue Service, an organization that brought together crews from dozens of different species. Humans and Thresh would serve together, responding to distress calls wherever they occurred, saving lives without regard for politics or borders. The speeches were long, as speeches at such events always were. Diplomats talked about cooperation. Military officers talked about courage. Scientists talked about the technologies that made the ship possible. But the speech that remembered most came from an unexpected source. His grandson had been asked to speak on behalf of the people. He was young for such an honor, barely 30 years old by human standards. But he had inherited his grandfather's gift for words, and he used it well. 44 years ago, he began, my grandfather sat in a chamber full of the most powerful beings in the galaxy and told them a story. He told them about a young human captain who changed course because strangers needed help. He told them about 17 crew members who gave their lives for people they had never met. He told them about a species that did not understand why the rest of us found their kindness so remarkable. He paused, looking out at the assembled crowd. Today, we launch a ship that carries that captain's name. But more than that, we launch an idea that says kindness is not weakness, that loyalty is not foolishness, that helping others without expectation of reward is not naive but noble, that the bonds we form through genuine care for each other are stronger than any treaty or alliance. His eyes found in the crowd. To the family, I say thank you. Thank you for giving us your ancestor. Thank you for carrying his spirit through the generations. Thank you for showing us what humanity can be when it is at its best. He turned to face the ship, its hull gleaming in the light of Earth's sun. And to Captain Peter, wherever his spirit may be, I say this, we have not forgotten. Remember. Humanity remembers. The galaxy remembers. Your 17 crew members did not die in vain. Their sacrifice lives on in this ship, in this service, in the countless lives that will be saved because of what you started. He raised his hand in a gesture of respect. Fair winds and following stars, Captain. May your name be spoken with honor for as long as beings travel among the stars. The ceremony ended with the traditional breaking of a bottle against the ship's hull. Had been given the honor and her hand shook as she swung the container. But when it shattered, spraying ceremonial liquid across the gleaming metal, she felt something settle inside her. A sense of completion. A feeling that a circle had been closed. The ship launched an hour later, its engines flaring bright against the darkness of space. Its first mission was already waiting, a colony ship in distress 3 star systems away. The crew, a mix of humans and other species, worked together with a coordination that seemed almost impossible for beings so different from one another. They saved everyone. And when they were asked how they had managed it, how they had overcome the challenges and risks, the captain, a young human woman named Tors, gave an answer that would have made Peter proud. They needed help, she said simply, and we could give it. In the decades that followed, the class rescue ships became legendary throughout the galaxy. They responded to thousands of distress calls, saved millions of lives, and became a symbol of what could be achieved when beings of different species worked together for a common cause. The Peter Foundation grew into one of the largest charitable organizations in known space, funding everything from rescue operations to medical research to disaster relief. And humanity's reputation changed. They were still seen as young and sometimes reckless. They still made mistakes, still got into conflicts, still struggled to understand the complex politics of galactic civilization. But underneath all of that, there was a new respect, an understanding that these strange beings from the small blue world had something that older species had lost along the way. They never forgot their defeat in the council chamber. They grumbled and plotted and looked for ways to regain the ground they had lost, but they also noticed that humans kept their word. When Earth signed a treaty, Earth honored it. When humans made a promise, humans kept it. Slowly, grudgingly, even they began to see the value in having such a species as neighbors. They analyzed human behavior for decades, trying to understand the logic behind their seemingly irrational kindness. Eventually, they developed a new theory, one that suggested that species which invested heavily in helping others actually gained long-term advantages that outweighed the short-term costs. They called it the effect, and it became a respected area of study in their scientific institutions. The thresh watched and learned and changed. They began responding to distress calls that they would once have ignored. They started helping species that had nothing to offer them in return. They never became as instinctively generous as humans, but they improved, and they credited humanity with showing them a better way. And the dying species that had started it all experienced a rebirth. The knowledge from their ancient vaults spread throughout the galaxy, but they themselves were the greatest beneficiaries. Technologies that they had developed ago were rediscovered and improved. Medical advances allowed them to overcome the genetic problems that had been slowly killing them. New colonies were founded, new children were born, and for the first time in centuries, the population began to grow. They never forgot what had made this possible. Every child learned the story of the endeavor. Every family kept a small reminder of Captain and his crew. Every ceremony included a moment of gratitude for the humans who had saved them when no one else would. The bond between humans and became the strongest in the galaxy, a friendship that transcended politics and profit and all the usual calculations that governed relations between species. When humans needed help, they were there. When needed support, humans provided it. The two species learned from each other, worked with each other, and grew together in ways that neither could have achieved alone. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth, the same truth that Peter had understood more than a century ago. Kindness matters. Loyalty matters. The willingness to help others without expecting anything in return is not weakness but strength. And the bonds built on genuine care for each other are the only bonds that truly last. The galaxy was vast and old and full of wonders. It contained species that had traveled among the stars for millions of years, civilizations that had risen and fallen while humanity was still learning to walk upright. But in all that vastness, across all those, one thing remained rare and precious: the willingness to change course for strangers, the courage to risk everything for people you have never met, the faith that doing the right thing is its own reward, even when no one is watching, even when no one will ever know. Humanity had that. They had always had it. And now, finally, the galaxy was beginning to understand what it meant. The people of Earth remembered loyalty, and they returned it in wild, unexpected ways. That was their gift to the universe. That was their legacy among the stars. And it was only the beginning.